Hello, and welcome to step one in the NeuroProductivity course, Prioritizing. So let's first talk about why prioritizing is so important. First of all, it ensures we get the maximum benefit for our efforts. Prioritizing means doing things that are in alignment with our mission or our purpose, our vision, our values, or our goals. And it turns out that most of us, most of the time, are operating on automatic unconscious programs that are associated with the past. And we'll talk about later things that are associated with cognitive ease or easy for us to do. And so, for us to ensure that we spend a certain amount of time on the things that are really important to what we want to accomplish or achieve, we should prioritize that to get the maximum benefit for our effort. Secondly, prioritizing has shown to reduce overwhelm. When we consider that overwhelm is a stress response, and stress can be caused by the feeling or the sense of losing control, then when our schedule is coming at us, when we feel like we're reacting all the time and we're firefighting all the time, that can create a sense of overwhelm, a stress response. And so by spending a little time to own our schedule and prioritizing things that are important to us, we have a chance to reduce that sense of overwhelm. Additionally, prioritizing can enhance our decision making. When we consistently remind ourselves or bring ourselves back to what's important, what is really meaningful to us, it makes it easier for us as we go throughout our day to make decisions that are in alignment with those values, those priorities, those goals. So there's just a few reasons why prioritizing is important. But let's talk about why we should prioritize prioritizing. One of the things I want you to consider is the amount of energy it takes to do this. One of the reasons why we don't prioritize is because it is difficult to do. It is hard for the brain to prioritize. It requires us to use an area of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. And it is the most resource-intensive component of our brain. The brain uses a lot of resources on its own. It uses 20% of our metabolic resources, even though it's only about 3% of our weight by volume. But it's also been shown that when chess masters are involved in an intense match, that they can increase the consumption of metabolic resources to that of an elite athlete. That means they're increasing their heart rate, their respiratory rate, and they're consuming glucose at a level of an athlete who's performing. That's pretty intense. And prioritizing happens to be one of the most resources intensive acts that we can do because it requires so much of the brain. It requires us to understand, to recall, to decide, to compare. And it's doing that in the prefrontal cortex, which is the least efficient area of our brain. And so a couple things that we want to think about when we consider that. Number one is you want to do prioritizing activities when you are resourced, when you feel at your best, when you have the most energy. And you want to avoid doing things before you prioritize that are going to consume that energy. Things like decision making, which can be answering emails or anything like that. And we want to consider that we want to make prioritizing a little bit easier for us as well. So one of the things that I recommend when it comes to prioritizing is to get it out of your head, to get all the tasks or things that you might have to do or want to do out of your head. I like sticky notes. So if we write out on one idea or one thing that we should work on per sticky note, we might even write on there how much time it thinks we think it's going to take to do that task. We now can get those concepts out of mind. It's less energy to recall them. And then we can start to organize those. And if we want to, we can implement those into activity that we're going to talk about later in a different lesson where we talk about the difference between importance and urgence and use a framework so we can actually use those sticky notes to our advantage. The other thing we want to consider when it comes to prioritizing and why we want to prioritize prioritizing is because we often go unconscious throughout our days. And I'm sure you've experienced this where your day just gets away from you and you don't know what's happening next. And so depending on how variable your schedule is, you want to consider when you prioritize so it's one of the first things that you do so that you've aligned yourself with your goals or mission or vision so that you've reminded yourself of what's important. So here's a couple takeaways. First of all, when you think about prioritizing, make it available to you at a time where you are resourced. So think about when you have the most energy. It could be beginning of the day, it could be after lunch, whatever that is important for you. Secondly, think about how often prioritizing needs to be done for you. Some of us have such variable schedules that maybe we need to prioritize daily. Some of us have more routine schedules that could allow us to prioritize weekly, but play with it and choose a cadence that works for you. And then put it into your calendar or make it obvious to you so that you will run into the queue to prioritize. Use whatever method you're currently using to remind you of tasks so that you follow through on your intention. So what I'm going to provide for you in this lesson is a worksheet. Every one of these lessons will have a worksheet. So download the worksheet, go through the worksheet. It'll walk you through the process, set you up with setting an implementation intention for prioritizing. This is step one in owning your time. I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope this is helpful for you. In the next step, we'll talk about saying no to distractions.